Late March 1945. The Third Reich is collapsing. American tanks are racing across Germany, crushing the last resistance of the Wehrmacht. Victory is days away. But in the headquarters of the Third Army, General George S. Patton is not celebrating. He is staring at a map, obsessed with a small, seemingly insignificant prisoner of war camp called Oflag 13B, near the town of Hammelburg. It is 60 miles behind enemy lines, 60 miles of forest, rivers, and desperate German units armed with Panzerfausts. To reach it is a suicide mission. No strategist in the world would recommend sending a small force that deep into enemy territory without support. But Patton does it anyway. He orders a secret task force to break through the lines and race to the camp. He tells his superiors it's a diversionary tactic. He tells the press it's a reconnaissance in force. But he is lying. George Patton wasn't trying to win the war that day. He was trying to save one single man, Lieutenant Colonel John Waters. Why was this one prisoner so important? Because he was George Patton's son-in-law.
This is the story of Task Force Baum, the only time in World War II when an American general sacrificed his own men for a personal family matter. And what happened when Dwight D. Eisenhower found out the truth almost ended Patton's career in disgrace. By the spring of 1945, George Patton was a legend. Old Blood and Guts was the most aggressive commander in the European theater. But privately, he was a worried father. His daughter, Beatrice, was married to John Waters, a brave officer who had been captured by the Germans way back in 1943 during the fighting in Tunisia. For 2 years, Waters had been a prisoner of war. Now, as the Allied armies closed in, Patton began to hear disturbing rumors. Intelligence reports suggested that the SS might start executing prisoners of war rather than let them be liberated. Other reports said the Germans were moving POWs deeper into the Bavarian Alps to use them as hostages for a final stand. Patton was terrified. The thought of his daughter's husband being murdered just days before the end of the war kept him awake at night. He started checking the location of every POW camp in his sector.
When he discovered that Oflag 13B was only 60 miles away, something in him snapped. He called his aide, Major Al Stiller. "Al," Patton said, "I want to send a column to Hammelburg. I want to bring those boys back." Stiller looked at the map. "General," he said, "that's 60 miles through solid German resistance. We don't have the fuel or the men to secure a corridor that long." "I don't care about a corridor," Patton barked. "I want a flying column. Fast, hard. Go in, smash the gate, grab the prisoners, and get out." It was madness. But nobody said no to George Patton. Patton went to his corps commander, General Manton Eddy. He ordered him to assemble a task force immediately. Eddy was horrified. He tried to argue. He told Patton that sending a small force that deep without support was sending them to their deaths. "I promise you," General Eddy told Patton, "these men will not come back." Patton didn't listen. He ordered the mission to proceed. But here is where the story gets dark. Patton knew that if he wrote down the real reason for the mission, to save my son-in-law, he would be court-martialed for misuse of military assets.
So he classified the mission as top secret and officially labeled it a raid to liberate American prisoners. He never mentioned John Waters by name in the official orders. The man chosen to lead this suicide mission was Captain Abraham Baum. He was a tough, battle-hardened kid from the Bronx, only 24 years old. When he was called to headquarters, Patton looked him in the eye. "I want you to go to Hammelburg," Patton said. "Break through the line, wake the Germans up, release the POWs, and bring them back." Baum looked at the map. He saw the sea of red enemy markers between him and the objective. "Sir," Baum asked, "what is the strength of the enemy?" "I don't know," Patton admitted, "but you can do it." Patton gave Baum a force of roughly 300 men, 16 Sherman tanks, and 28 half-tracks. It was too small to fight a real battle, but too big to sneak past the Germans unnoticed. It was, as one historian later called it, a sacrificial lamb. Baum had no idea that the real target was the general's son-in-law. He just thought it was another crazy Patton order. On the night of March 26th, Task Force Baum roared to life. To get to the German lines, they first had to break through the front. It was violent and chaotic. The American tanks blasted a hole in the German defenses, and the column sped through into the darkness. For the next 24 hours, it was absolute chaos. Task Force Baum was driving blind through enemy territory. They were attacked from every side. In every village they passed, German soldiers with Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets were waiting. Baum lost tank after tank. Men were screaming, bleeding, dying in the back of half-tracks. But Baum kept pushing. He knew he couldn't stop. If he stopped, they would be surrounded and annihilated. They had to keep moving. Back at headquarters, Patton was pacing like a caged tiger. He had no radio contact with the task force. He had sent 300 men into the dark, and now he could only wait. Meanwhile, General Eisenhower was completely unaware of the operation. He was busy coordinating the massive collapse of the German army. He had no idea that one of his top generals was running a private rescue mission on the side. By some miracle, on the afternoon of March 27th, the battered remnants of Task Force Baum reached Hammelburg. They had lost men, they were low on fuel, and they were exhausted, but they had made it. Inside Oflag 13B, the prisoners heard the rumble of engines. Then they saw the white stars on the green tanks. A cheer went up that could be heard for miles. "The Yanks are here! Patton is here!" Among the prisoners was Lieutenant Colonel John Waters. He was thin, malnourished, but alive. When the American tanks smashed through the camp's barbed wire fence, it was a moment of pure euphoria. But the joy lasted only minutes. The camp was guarded, but the guards were quickly overwhelmed. However, the noise of the battle had alerted every German unit in the area. In the confusion of the liberation, tragedy struck. John Waters and a German officer were trying to negotiate a ceasefire to allow the prisoners to exit safely. As they walked toward the American lines under a white flag, a fanatical German soldier, unaware of the negotiation, opened fire. He shot John Waters in the hip.
Patton's son-in-law, the man the entire mission was built around, collapsed in the mud, bleeding heavily. He couldn't walk. He couldn't be moved easily. The mission had failed before it even finished. Captain Baum now faced a nightmare. He had hundreds of weak, starving prisoners who wanted to climb onto his tanks, but he had no room. He had wounded men. His tanks were running on fumes, and the Germans were closing in. Night fell. The task force tried to retreat back to American lines, but the Germans had brought up heavy Tiger tanks and self-propelled guns. They had completely surrounded the area. The retreat turned into a slaughter. In the darkness, the American tanks were picked off one by one. Fireballs illuminated the night sky. Men scattered into the woods, trying to escape on foot. Captain Baum was shot in the groin. He was bleeding out on the hood of a jeep. By the morning of March 28th, Task Force Baum ceased to exist. All the tanks were destroyed. All the half-tracks were burning. Of the 300 men who went in, 32 were killed. Only 35 made it back to American lines. The rest, over 200 men, were captured, including Captain Baum. He ended up as a prisoner in the very hospital inside the camp he had come to liberate. And John Waters? He was dragged back into the camp hospital by Serbian fellow prisoners who saved his life. He remained a prisoner until the camp was officially liberated by the massive 14th Armored Division 9 days later. The raid had achieved nothing. Nothing but death. When the news of the disaster reached Patton, he was crushed. But he was also afraid. He knew he had screwed up. He immediately tried to spin the story. He issued a press release claiming that Task Force Baum was a diversion intended to distract the Germans from his main attack. He claimed that the raid had confused the enemy and was therefore a success. But the press wasn't buying it. Journalists began to ask questions. Why did you send such a small force so deep? Why to Hammelburg specifically? Is it true your son-in-law was there? The New York Times broke the story. The headline was devastating. It implied that General Patton had wasted American lives for a family reunion. Dwight D. Eisenhower was in his headquarters in Reims when he read the report. Witnesses say his face went purple.
He slammed the newspaper onto his desk. "He sent them for his son-in-law," Eisenhower reportedly shouted. "I've backed George through thick and thin, but this is beyond the pale." Eisenhower summoned Patton. The meeting was private, but aides outside heard shouting. Eisenhower reprimanded Patton more severely than he ever had before. "You have gambled with the lives of your men for personal reasons," Eisenhower told him. "You have compromised the integrity of command. If you weren't George Patton, I would strip you of your rank and send you home in irons." Patton stood there, taking it. For once, he had no clever comeback. He knew he was wrong. He wrote in his diary later that night, "I made a mistake, I admitted. I should have sent a larger force." Notice, he didn't say he shouldn't have sent them. He only regretted not sending more men to die. To protect the morale of the Army and the public image of the war effort, Eisenhower decided not to fire Patton. The war was almost over. Firing America's greatest hero weeks before VE Day would have been a PR disaster. So the official Army history downplayed the event. They stuck to the diversion lie for years. But the men of Task Force Baum knew the truth. Years later, Captain Baum met Patton in a hospital. Patton was visiting the wounded. He saw Baum lying in a bed, recovering from his wounds. Patton walked over. He looked at the young captain whose life he had almost thrown away. There were tears in the general's eyes. "I'm sorry, Abe," Patton whispered. "I'm so sorry." Patton reached into his pocket and pulled out a medal, the Distinguished Service Cross. He pinned it on Baum's pajamas right there in the hospital ward. It was a gesture of guilt. Patton knew that Baum had paid the price for a father's anxiety. The raid on Hammelburg remains the most controversial decision George S. Patton ever made. Supporters say it showed his loyalty to family and his aggressive spirit. Critics say it was a criminal abuse of power that resulted in the meaningless deaths of brave soldiers. It reminds us that even the greatest generals are human. They have fears, they have families, and sometimes their personal feelings can cloud their judgment with deadly consequences. Patton won many battles. He liberated millions of people. But in the forests near Hammelburg, he lost something he could never get back: the absolute trust that a general puts the mission above himself. Task Force Baum was a failure, but it stands as a tragic monument to the complex, flawed, and fascinating man that was George S. Patton.